we have some awesome panel, and all of us represent drones. So we heard about satellites, and the drones are closer to the earth, but they do something similar, right? So we'll have a brief discussion on both defense and civil drones, right? So that's the panel here. So in fact, this weekend I was at a party, and it was quite interesting because 3-4 guys came and asked me, do we have enough Shahid drones, and do we have kamikaze drones? So the mainstream media has covered these Ukraine, Russia, and the Middle East war so much that people talk about the drone specs like an Android phone spec, right? So it's become very common now. It's like the whole concept of drones has gone very mainstream, and so why is it so important, right? Why are the wars defined by drones these days? It's purely boils down to the economics. So if you look at the whole Ukraine-Russia war, clearly Russia is artillery heavy, right? All these tanks and all that were actually dismantled or incapacitated by precision drones which the Ukraine used. And if you come to the what's happening in US and Iran, clearly Iran is able to defend purely because of its Shahid drones, right? And if you look at the economics there, they say that it's somewhere around $20,000 per drone, and the US is using Patriot missiles, which is 2 million. So the ratio is somewhere 200:1 if you look at it. So essentially, I think the whole war game is boiling down to the economics, and if some of these drones can be hacked, for example, right, then it even brings down the cost. I think that's where Sai comes in. His company ZUPPA Networks is actually building indigenous capabilities to make some of our drones secure, right? So Sai, maybe you can briefly introduce yourself, your company, and say what you are doing in this space.
Good afternoon to you all. You see, as Ariel was just mentioning, now we all have heard in all the media about drones having explosives and taking down billions of dollars worth of equipment, be it a satellite radar or whatever it is. But which means that essentially the drone has to have an explosive element. So the moment any drone is weaponized either in the form of having its own explosive or carrying some explosive, it becomes double-edged sword. So unless you're able to really ensure that it cannot be hacked and it cannot be redirected towards you, or it cannot be spoofed into giving a GPS location that is where you are based, unless you can do that, I don't think you can use that drone effectively. And you yourself become, a target if the enemy is able to do that. And I think one of the key things that has happened in all these recent wars has been the factor of electronic warfare, and electronic warfare involving hacking, spoofing, jamming, and a whole lot of other things that have happened. So I think that's where the cybersecurity part becomes very important. And that's where we are playing a very key role, because we have the flight control, an completely indigenous patented flight control system, which is, for which we got the patent from the government of India. And, one other thing I'd like to mention here is that when you're talking about cybersecurity, not many look at a drone as a flying computer. The fact is a drone is a flying computer because you have taken the man out of it, and the flight is happening electronically. So it's flying because of its own artificial intelligence or AI. And that is what happens with the autopilot or the motherboard of the drone. And that is what we make in India, and which is our proprietary patented technology. And we've also got it cleared by STQC, which currently today is in the news because of the CCTV camera hacking that has happened. So STQC is certifying CCTV cameras. They've certified our drone as well. And we have supplied close to over 500 drones to the Indian Army in the last 3 months, cyber secure. And that is what we are working towards. And that's where we see a major value addition coming, because as Ariel was saying, this is a continuously iterating game. So you need to have control of the deep technology to be able to iterate it to counter whatever the enemy is doing. So that's where I think we play a significant part.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Sai. So yeah, I think it's like a cat and mouse game, right? It's like, if you look at it, in fact, 2-3 years back, we realized that electronic warfare will be critical. In fact, last year in Aero India, from our side, we launched drones which are electronic warfare resilient. But unfortunately, there were no takers, right? There was not much of interest from the Indian Army. People didn't see it. But 2 months later, the whole Ops Sindoor happened. And that is when they realized the need. Because the peacetime scenario and wartime scenario is very different. So our drones were used for surveillance during peacetime. So it's all in your own control. Whereas once you get into a contested environment, then obviously the comm is jammed, the GPS is spoofed, then there is no way the drone can navigate. So we have vision-based navigation, so that way the drone can still return home safely. So these are some capabilities which we introduced, and now almost every requirement from the Indian Army is requiring EW capabilities, right? Resilient. So I'll bring Santosh. So I think they do a lot of kamikaze and different class of drones for the Indian Army. So you can talk about the recent trends in terms of procurement and what you're doing in this space.
So, as you mentioned about the Operation Sindoor, so last year when Operation Santosh, one of the co-founder of IG Defense, when Operation Sindoor happened last time, Indian Army was not having any offensive drones in terms of short scale. When I'm selling about short drones, which is FPV kamikaze drones. As a company, we were given the challenge that can you deliver such type of drones to Indian Army? At that point of time, when our borders were burning, we were able to deliver kamikaze drones to Indian Army, which was deployed in Operation Sindoor, appreciated by Government of India. Over the period of time, what you're seeing is like Ukraine-Russia war, or is it Iran-Israel war? The drone warfare plus this EW warfare, which as you mentioned, is growing. That is where the whole picture is shifting. Economics of scale. How much a small drone which costs below 5 lakhs can go and destroy? Or if there is a kamikaze action which is there, what is the counter mechanism which they are using? How much it is getting destroyed? Over the period of time, Indian Army has been procuring a lot of drones. The procurement cycle has changed and all. You are the #1 player in terms of supplying FPV kamikaze drones. You have supplied 5,000 plus FPV kamikaze drones in the span of last 6 months to Indian Army. While the armory that is growing up, the technology is where it is taking a step. As Sai sir was mentioning about it, there is a lot of talk around Atmanirbhar Bharat. There is a lot of talk about indigenous systems. You're aligned with Sai sir there, like, if you do not build technology today, then tomorrow you cannot scale. That is where our focus has been. That is where our IPs and patents have been. Granted 7+ patent over last 2 years, have been into that patent space, having 50+ patents, which is already being applied. Because if you don't build this core IP, then it will become a redundant technology in the coming days. India as a country today, it do not have an option that it need to be self-reliant. There is no option. It is the ultimate option which is required, because while the global geopolitical scenario is changing, if India is not relying, even if they go on increasing the defense budget to the extent of 10 lakh crores or what, it will not be self-sufficient. That is where companies like us are working towards the self-reliance, and that is where our innovations, like be it a Sahid class drones, like we'd be glad to know that you are building Project Kal, which is a Sahid class drone, which is a low-cost drone in terms of long range, can hit to the extent of 1,000 kilometers. That's the kind of drones which you are building, because you want Indian security to be top class, sovereignty towards the one, building indigenous technology.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So what, in terms of scale, right, if you look at globally, 80% of drones are from one company and one country, right? So everything is from China. And so there is a need for alternative options, not just for India. Even US is looking for alternative options. So that is where probably there is an option for Indian companies to go and participate in this global market. I mean, it's not just the Indian context. And the other thing is, this is a dual use technology. So if you look at internet, for example, internet started with ARPANET for the US Army. And eventually now we know that it's so pervasive, right? So drones clearly have a bigger edge on the defense side. And in fact, because of the recent wars and the benefit that economics that drones bring in, it has been a game changer, and the defense requirement has skyrocketed. But there are amazing applications for drones on the civil side. And obvious ones is delivery, right? Now with the quick commerce and the way quick commerce has picked up, drones can be a game changer. And that's where Naman from Airbound can enlighten us on what he's doing from the Airbound side and how they are using delivery on the civil side, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the core thesis behind Airbound is that logistics today, I don't believe logistics today is about the movement of goods. We believe that logistics today is actually built around the movement of people. Every time your package has to move around, at any point in that flow, your package has to be chaperoned by a person, whether this is someone driving a scooter, whether this is someone driving a truck. And it's a very unnecessary requirement. Right? I think if we go back to, around 30 years ago or so, if you needed to send a message to someone sitting halfway across the world, you would need to send them a letter. That letter would need to go to the post office, be aggregated across a few locations, eventually be put on a truck, go into a plane. It's a very complex flow. It's very expensive. It's very time consuming. Now today you can just send a WhatsApp message, right? This data moves instantly from one location to another, because what we've done is we've converted the movement of information from a movement of humans into just the transfer of bits, the transfer of energy. And when we get into worlds where moving things is the same as moving energy, movement can become very, very efficient. And that's our idea as well. Logistics, when made autonomous, is not a problem of how do you move people, it's a problem of how do you move energy. You're trying to move mass from one point to another, that's a physics problem. And we've realized that if you get this physics problem right, you can dramatically bring down costs. You can do things that feel very, very unintuitive, like having 5 kg payload drones that can compete with the unit economics of trucks carrying tons at the same time. Because here you don't need to bundle things together. You don't need to amortize the cost of one human over many packages. Instead, you can just move things directly to locations. If you're thinking about, again, deliveries as a movement of energy, the fastest way to move things is in between 2 points. You can get things faster, you can get things for low cost, and that can change the way logistics as a whole works. It feels very different. It feels very difficult for a lot of people to wrap their heads around, but we have done this before with the internet.
So can you talk about some of the trials that you are doing now, and what challenges do you face in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, unlike on the defense side, regulations become a big challenge with civil drones, right? We are not operating in battlefields. We're operating in environments where civilians live and operate. And so the standard for safety is very, very high with these drones. We don't need to operate in a GPS denied area, but we need to make sure drones cannot fall from the sky. And a lot needs to change to allow for regulations to be suitable for these drones. Today, all of the regulations that we have are really built off of what we use for planes. And oftentimes that does not allow for the speed of iteration with drones. It's very hard to fly drones over very long distances beyond visual line of sight. And we need to move towards a regulatory framework that lets that happen.
Yeah, I think given that these are flying objects, there is definitely a natural scare from the regulator point of view to freely allow it, right? So in fact, I heard that cars were banned 100 years back in many countries because people were scared that someone can go and hit someone, right? So naturally every tech has its own phase of adoption. So I think there has been significant improvement in the last few years, but naturally from the industry point of view, I think things can be lot better in terms of allowing beyond visual line of sight. So just from a regulation point of view, 95% of the country is a green zone where someone can just go fly a drone up to 400 feet, right, or 120 meters. And beyond 500 feet, of course, is the commercial or helicopters and air traffic is different, right? So, but still, if you look at most of the cities, the areas around the airport, for example, up to 12 kilometers around the airport is like a red zone. So that limits the usage, because almost all cities, all tier 2 towns have airports or some critical installation. So that becomes a red zone. So I think that's what Naman was referring to in terms of getting regulatory approvals and things like that, right? So if you look at drones from an even defense perspective, there are two distinct models, right? If you look at what China is doing and if you look at what Ukraine is doing, these are two different things. So China has set up a huge manufacturing facility with a lot of these drones, and the cost is way different, and they are able to rule in terms of their supply chain manufacturing skills. And if you look at how Ukraine has evolved over the last few years, they are adopting on the go, right? They are improvising, and some of these like the drones that were used in the initial stages of the Ukraine-Russia war to what is being used is significantly different. So Sai referred to some cases where the jamming and things like that. Now they use with optical fiber, right? There are optical fibers which runs for miles, and the drones are completely connected. So there is no way you can jam the communication because it runs through optical fiber. So I see these two models where you set up a huge manufacturing facility and then you scale, or you improvise based on the need, right? So I'll probably bring in Sai to talk from a scale point of view, right? So Sai, where do you think the industry is? What is that we need to scale the drone industry in the Indian context?
Yeah. So, if you talked about Ukraine, you talked about China, let's talk about Iran. We are talking about scale to the extent that, if the US and Israel have a couple of, say, maybe 6,000, 7,000 missiles, Iran has about 10 times that volume. If you talk about drones that Ukraine talks about, it's running into millions. But the entire defense manufacturing ecosystem that we are talking about, whether it be, if you look at it from the earlier kind of conventional warfare, which is essentially you talk about tanks, guns, and very sophisticated missiles like Patriots, etc. You're talking about manufacturing a couple of hundred or maybe at best a couple of thousand in a year. And today what is required is millions in a year. And China is talking about having 2 million drones ready. Ukraine also has ramped up their production to about 2 million drones, 1.3 or 1.5 million drones. Russia is also talking about millions of drones. So everyone is talking about drones in the millions. And we are not talking about smaller volumes. So one of the challenges in this is how do you get industrial scale production into defense now? Because defense is used to lower volumes, higher prices and higher margins. Now you're talking about the other way around, which is the asymmetry has shifted from, to the other side. So now you require more production capacity, and you require to be able to democratize this production capacity. You require to be able to use whatever you have in times of war, now where you require surge volumes as the military talks about. Yeah. So I think the mental shift to move from the old archaic ways of, like in India, I'll just give you an example. We have this defense industrial license that requires a company to have 30 years of lease or own a place. Now the current set of companies like drones, we don't need to have that kind of space, and neither does our investor want to invest in capital assets. They want to look at working capital. So how does a company which you need you need new tech, but you don't have a system that accepts new tech in its own way? So I think these are shifts that are going to be critical for especially a country like India to go through, because we do have certain old sets of rules and regulations. And as Naman said, he put it very correctly, our civilian drone regulation is designed from a plane's perspective rather than a drone's perspective. So I think these are all mindsets changes that will have to be taken. How fast they are taken and how early they are taken is what is important. And I think that would be more by, in the defense side at least, it would be governed more by the threat perception as far as we feel, because we have enemies on all sides, and obviously none of them are going to be giving us support. And our key players who supply us defense equipment like Russia is already in a war themselves. So I think we'll have to take some quick decisions, and certain radical changes would have to be there. And that is something that India will have to contend.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. So even if you look at the US, Israel, Iran war, they say it's a war of attrition, right? Ultimately, who runs out of their gear first? So, and with the cost advantage that Iran has, and they are just trying to hold off as long as they can, right? Ultimately, the economics will work. And then, as you said, if the ratio is 200:1 between the Patriot and the Shahid drones, then it's just a matter of time before someone gives up. So that's a great point. And Santosh, so what are we doing from the industry point of view and also from the army procurement point of view in terms of meeting this gap, right?
In terms of scale, it's something like players like China and Ukraine, they are currently like the capacity which they have built, maybe due to war for Ukraine or maybe due to the scale at which they operate for China. To match that, that needs a radical changes. Like currently, over the period of 9 months as a company, IG has scaled up to 500 FPV drones per day. Over the period of 9 months, you have scaled up, taken space, taken that approach of a software driven company. Let me be very honest about the fact, rather than being a hardware driven company. While companies are taking, like the startups and the growing emerging companies are taking steps to scale up and all, the regulatory perspective, as Naman was mentioning about the fact, like he can build drones maybe in 6 months, but to test it across, to do that particular end use case is where the regulatory support which is required. Like Sai mentioned about the fact that the regulations of DIL, which requires 30-year lease time. And for startups like us who exist for less than 10 years, my investor will never agree to put a money for 30 years for a capex. That's the kind of challenges which is there. So there need to be, while startups and companies are radically changing themselves to match up to the demand of Indian Army plus, government also need to take 2 steps forward. Like even like giving an example of emergency procurement. Like government calls it as emergency procurement for army, but to be honest, it's a timeline of 12 months. So if it is emergency, it can never be 12 months. Those are the changes which need to be done. While government is working for sure, the procurement cycle, the regulatory changes, the policy changes, that need to be done drastically to support the industry. Because as a software industry, India has grown up a lot. At a automobile industry, India has grown up a lot. As a, like to be honest, UPI plus this digital payment technology, India has grown a lot. So if you really want hardware players or space tech players, drone tech players or defense tech players to grow up, those are the radical changes which need to be done from the government, which will definitely support. And all the players who are there in the emerging sectors, they are up for it. Like everybody is up for it to address to the demand which is there, scale to the demand which is there.
Great. Yeah. So I think probably I will go for the last question in terms of what are the opportunities in this industry and with autonomous systems, right? So from taking a cue from what you mentioned, if you look at the automobile industry in India, so there are a handful of OEMs, right? You can count them in 2 hands probably, but there are probably 300 plus auto component manufacturers. So that is probably the opportunity even in the drone industry, right? There will be a handful of OEMs who build the whole drones. Though it is very cool to say that I'm building drones, the opportunity is building component, right? I think even Nikhil Kamath mentioned in one of the things where one of the conferences where he said that the money is in boring industries, oil and gas and things like that. So this industry sounds so cool that we have probably 200, 300 drone OEMs in the country, and definitely probably there is no market for so many companies, right? OEMs, but the opportunity is definitely there for component manufacturers. There are, I think the US NDAA authorization bill, which is the US defense bill, which states that there are 9 critical components in a drone, which they want to avoid from a country of concern, which includes China, right? So there is a clear global opportunity for Indian startups to focus on these components. I think Sai gave a great example of autopilot. So there are a number of sensors where there is a huge gap, right? So I think from the industry point of view, getting into the components is where I see an opportunity. So maybe I'll request others to add in terms of any last words, right, beyond this. Sai, maybe starting with you.
Yeah, as you were saying, you see, the whole world is looking for alternatives to Chinese supply chain. And I think that's where the opportunity lies as far as Indian companies are concerned. I fully, I agree with what you're saying, that making components for a global scale and to global standards is going to be a huge opportunity, because people are looking for an alternative to China, and I don't think any of the other continents really can do what we can do, because I think we've got used to functioning with China on our and our back doors. So I think we will definitely be able to come through with it much better than many others would, and I think that's where we need to be looking at.
Perfect. Yeah. Any last words from your side, Naman?
I think I think drones is definitely an industry where government and industry have to work in tandem. I think whether it is around defense contracts, whether it is around civilian drones, I think we need to modernize regulations a lot more, right? We need to move towards bills not being based on, the safety standards of aviation, move away from bills being based on, requiring 30-year licenses, and start to build policy from the ground up based on the fast moving nature of startups, because this technology is changing every year.
Sure. Yep.
As I've already mentioned about the regulation is something we need to step up. Government need to come forward. Like, you are definitely looking for all the PLI schemes and all which is coming for the drone tech industries. We hope that those will be helpful and kind of scale up the industry to 10x. Like, drone industry in India has reached to some extent. You'll not say that you are far behind all those players, but the gap which is there can only be kind of addressed when both government and private sector players work together in tandem and kind of ramp it up.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's a great note to end this session. So drones are definitely the future, and we will see. We just need to accelerate the journey towards it, right? So thanks everyone. I think it was very engaging.